Especially since this wasn't a case of a separate trip being set up ahead of time. This was a case of me being invited and then uninvited from a week-long tropical vacation with a guy friend of hers who I had never met before. We eventually decided to make a trip together to Copenhagen, which we both wanted to visit as compensation. I also asked to meet him to feel more comfortable with the trip. We spent the 4th of July going to see him and his girlfriend in the city where they live. And although it was nice to put a face to a name, it was ultimately a very cold trip, and he was not at all welcoming to me. My girlfriend remarked on how unfriendly he was to both of us, she thought, and said she was surprised he didn't act warmly to me. I went out of my way to get to know him and his girlfriend, but it didn't click. Even after several days, they were somewhat cold to each other as well. They bickered a little about their future and his 3-week trip without her, scheduled for the same time as our trip. This had been my effort to feel better about the trip, so I told my girlfriend that I still didn't feel comfortable with things and was insulted by how it was handled. I had tried to make things smooth between us, and I asked her to please come up with something to help me feel better about the trip. On a visit to her family, they asked about the trip. They were all shocked that she would have arranged it this way. They told me they would have been furious if they were in my position, which triggered a fight in which I asked her to please help come up with a strategy to make me feel better and more secure about them going together without me. She said she would never do this kind of thing again, which feels like not much to offer since this is a once-in-a-lifetime trip. She kind of offered not to go on the trip, but she had already paid for the tickets and made arrangements, and I didn't want to stop their trip and be resented by both her and her best friend. She asked me to give her ideas of how to make me feel better and wanted me just to tell her what to do but stalled until it was finally the day of the trip. She bought me a bag of peanut butter cups, and I drove them to the airport. I feel so disregarded and disrespected in this situation. I want to break up with her, but don't want to burn up something that has otherwise been really good. Update: I was really upset the day I dropped her off, and she was texting me, but I wasn't responding. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I didn't want to do anything at all in the state I was in. I waited until the next day, and then I sent her a thought-out text letting her know that I didn't feel safe or loved in how the trip was handled and that I would be dropping her things off at her place and leaving her keys with a neighbor. She called but left no messages. She then messaged me that she didn't understand. She called and messaged me the rest of the week, but I couldn't pick up or text back. On Thursday, she realized I was serious and asked me logistical questions. Told her which neighbor her key was with, etc. When she returned and saw everything at her place, she got pretty frantic and called and left me a long message. I was working all day, but still didn't want to respond. She asked me to explain because she didn't understand what was happening. The next day, I sent another text to clarify that it was over, and she got upset and sent me a bunch of texts in a row about how she didn't understand why I was throwing away everything we had built. She left me an angry voicemail and said she had no idea why I was upset, that she did not accept the breakup because she had no say in it, and that she wanted me to tell her the evil story that I had made up about her to her face. I wasn't going to respond to her and wanted to remain calm, but this upset me. So I sat down to write her this letter. I tried to call her, but I started crying and told her I'd just email instead. This is what it said. The time we have had apart has given me some good space and time to think. I have had a chance to think about the important things for me in a relationship, and I see that we should not be together. From the very start, this trip was made in an insanely disrespectful way. It started with you being given an ultimatum by your male best friend, whom I had never met, that either he or I go on this trip, and you picked him. You didn't offer to have him meet me. Encourage him to find someone else to come or consult me at all. That's enough for most people to have a deal breaker right there. However, I state, this is a person who you have a history with that is not entirely clear to me. You did not tell me this was happening until I asked when the trip to Hawaii would be. You purchased tickets in another very disrespectful situation in which I cooked dinner and had guests present. You chose to go into my room for well over an hour to select tickets with him, and I repeatedly asked you to please come to dinner because you said it would just be a few more minutes each time. There is no reason for doing it at that time and in that, seeing as he is in the same time zone as us and has a 9-to-5 job. This makes me feel sick to my stomach. Your dad, mom, and grandparents were all very surprised when we told them about this trip. It is becoming very obvious that this is a dangerous trip to make with the fragility of our relationship. He arrived at my place very late, and we woke up the next morning so I could take the two of you to the airport. After this lead up, I know you can tell how unhappy I am. I fully absolutely know you can tell how unhappy I am. You leave, and when I don't respond to your text messages, you text me to tell me that you hope I'm okay and you're going to bed. No call. The rest of the week was rough. My text to you was met with, essentially, I'm sorry you feel this way. You tell me that I'm being unfair. There was no acknowledgement, and there still has been none. But this trip to a honeymoon destination, as we have discussed before, could be a crazy and horrible thing to go through with, even with my quasi-blessing. This is not something that people in relationships have to deal with. I guess this is not something that people in relationships do besides me. In the end, all of this is to say that I have felt serious emotional needs go seriously unmet in a way that is a deal breaker for me. There have been some wonderful, very positive times. Still, there has been unnecessary heartache and suffering for me over things that come down to what I can only assume are personal differences. I cannot handle your relationship with Matt. And I suppose I could ask you to pick between him and me, but that's not what I want to do. I want you to have your best friend, and I want to leave. I did love you, but I am not about to fight this fight and hear you tell me I'm crazy for not seeing how platonic everything is for the rest of my life. It seems like trying to convince someone to like different food or to have a different favorite color. I am unhappy about this, and I no longer want to feel these feelings. There is no need for this to be mutual. I do not need your permission to break up with you. She wrote me an apologetic email in which she accepted responsibility for most things without any argument, except she denied anything that had to do with her relationship with him, making me uncomfortable. She denied that I would be unable to handle their relationship. She said my perspective was the only thing that made their trip bad for me. I told her that trust has to be built and that she put too much strain too early on a relationship in which we had not developed that trust. She agreed and apologized. It ended on a pretty amicable note, but this relationship style doesn't work for me, and I don't feel like her responses to me really healed or changed anything significantly. I stand by my decision at this point.